Thank you so much for having me, Jody, and the World War II American Experience. I'm going to start off with a joke, and you'll understand why in a minute. So why are all famous American battles fought in national parks? Okay. The reason I try to add a little bit of levity is the stuff that we surround ourselves with is imprinted with that history. Okay. This is stuff from the battlefield, and it has a presence. When you handle it, when you surround yourself with it, when you restore it, it's still 80 years of battlefield. And it's as alive as the day as it happened. And so this is an interactive event. I want to talk about the Battle of Iwo Jima. I want to share the artifacts with you. I want to answer your questions. So does everybody know about Iwo Jima, why it's important? Okay, so we'll go brief little history. So the Battle of Iwo Jima was from February 19th, 1945 until March 26th of 1945. The battle lasted about 36 days. And it was a small island in the Western Pacific. Now, why Iwo Jima? And I get this question a lot. You know, why didn't we just fly from California and bomb Japan? Right? Wouldn't that have been easy? Well, planes didn't fly that far. And so the island hopping campaign was pivotal because the aircraft, the flight was only around for 30 years. And we had only developed pressurized aircraft during World War II. In fact, that's why we have modern day flight, is because of the B-29 Superfortress. And these aircraft could not travel that distance. They couldn't even fly from Hawaii to bomb Japan. So there was an event which we're going to just talk about briefly. The Doolittle raid, which was launched from the USS Hornet, was the only time that we could actually strike back, and that was after the December 7th attack on 1941. So the island hopping campaign was just to get an airfield moving closer and closer to Japan. Iwo Jima was actually Japanese sovereign territory, and it was about 750 miles from the islands, the main islands of Japan. So from there, we could launch air attacks from February and ultimately March, when the battle had concluded, to bomb mainland Japan. Okay. Who here lives at this museum? That is actually a true statement, okay? But the reason I ask that, and the reason these things are here, 110,000 Marines and sailors took part in the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, to put that in perspective, a modern-day football stadium holds about 60 to 70,000, all right? So when you're talking about 110,000 people participating in a battle, you really don't understand the metrics unless you talk about the things. So for 36 days, 110,000 people had to eat 3 times a day, had to go to the bathroom, needed water. And so unless you lived in this museum, you had to get in a car, drive here, eat, and we're all going to go home. It cost me 6 gallons of gas, and so on and so forth. These Marines and these sailors had to carry all their stuff onto the beach, onto the island, and fight for a month, being resupplied incrementally. So when you're talking about just food, all right, that's 300,000 meals per day, all right? 500 ships were participating in the Battle of Iwo Jima. And the artifacts today are actually getting kind of thin, because I myself am a service member. I did 26 years. I came home. I put my crap in a box. And I haven't really looked at it. This is a true statement. But yet we hold these things so precious, and we build museums to tell their stories. The artifacts by themselves don't talk. It's us as historians and storytellers and archivists, all right, that tell these stories. So let's handle some stuff, right? I love interaction. Please ask questions. Again, my name is Van. Just raise your hand, say, Van, I'd like to know about whatever. We can drift a little bit about Iwo Jima. We're not here to talk about the battle, but we can. But let's talk about the actual stuff. All right, so this is a duffel bag. Not exciting, right? Everyone's seen. What's that?
Unless your stuff is in it.
So here's a funny joke. There are no thieves in the military. Everybody's just trying to get their own stuff back. All right, so this is a duffel bag. It's plain, right?
No.
No. Why is it not plain? What's different about it? This is an Iwo Jima artifact.
Yeah. It's got Iwo Jima dust on it.
It does.
Iwo Jima.
Black sand.
Well,
Black sand.
it does, but it also has Chinese dirt on it, okay? This is actually from the 1920s.
Chinese?
So this was from a China Marine. This dates from before World War II. So everybody thinks that when you got onto the battlefield, you got your stuff right then. Oh, actually no. People were in the military for decades before World War II, and this particular service member was in the Marine Corps in the 1920s, and this was given to him. That's why the hasps look different. It's kind of a different color. It's not all drab, but this was at Iwo Jima. And so one of the things I want to point out, you see this weird shape? Okay, so 110,000 people land on the beach. And it's perfectly orchestrated. Everyone's in the exact right spot, right? Everybody's got all their gear.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Bombing work.
Everybody can read. Everyone can write. Everybody has, they've got their cell phone. They can just look it up, right? Where's the enemy at?
Right, yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
No. So in order to track your gear, okay, you have markings on them, because this is going to be in a pile somewhere. So the Marine Corps developed what were called Unit Numerical Identification System, or UNIS. And it was a geometric shape and then a number code. And even if you couldn't read well or understand well or convey well, you could at least look at shapes. And if you walk around in the museum, you'll see on some of the vehicle, they're called POM markings, Preparation for Overseas Movement. And it's a color and numbering system. It's 3 colors. And it's a repeat. So say red, blue, red, and then you'll see 5 numbers. The Harley-Davidson WLA that's in between the 2 Shermans in the museum actually has it on the fender. And so let's say you're 20 years old, you don't have a high school education. My grandfather, when he got out of school, was in the 9th grade, right? It was the Depression, had to work in a factory. Graduating was very rare. So how do you get soldiers who fought amazingly well a simple system of identification to keep all their stuff? Okay, so the Marines created the UNIS system, UNIS, and all of their gear was marked with it. So this is kind of an exciting bag by the fact that it was already 20 years old by the time it hit the beaches of Iwo Jima. All right. It also has another UNIS marking on the back, which is a circle with a 1 in it. Okay, because as the battles in the Pacific or the battles in the European campaign changed, you had to have a new marking for each one, right? You can't use the same marking. That would be logical. But they did it because different units fought at different times, all right? Here's another bag. This one is kind of exciting. This just came from an estate last year. It was thrown away. This is a United States Marine Corps upper and lower pack, all right? And if you look on the back, it has this diamond shape. This is the entrenching tool cover. Everything was marked, right? Because there's no thieves in the military,
No.
right? So it's a triangle and has 713 in it and a 70. And that means nothing to nobody except the people that had their particular gear. This was worn by an Amtrak driver, which was an amphibious tractor. They were LVT, landing vehicle tracked, and they could carry troops or a jeep or a cannon. If you've seen the movie Flags of Our Fathers, they have a bunch of them. If you go to D-Day Conneaut, there's a couple that operate up there. Frank needs to buy one in the near future, right? That's a free plug. But this was from an Amtrak crew member, and so this actually took place, was there at the Battle of Iwo Jima, February and March of 1945, and it was thrown away last summer. And so that's how it came to my attention. And it's sad, but it's because there isn't necessarily an education about it. And that's why I volunteered to give talks like this to educate and say, hey, this is what this stuff is. I mean, this was there during that time. And I encourage you later on to actually come up, ask questions, look at this stuff. So UNIS markings, let's move on to uniforms. Any questions so far?
How did you find that?
The thrown away bag.
Yeah, so this actually was found by a junk picker who just goes from trash to trash looking, and he said, well, that's some old Army stuff. And it should be saved because it's, you know, worth $1 or $2. Brought it to my attention because I actually go around to a lot of these entities and I say, hey, what have you found? Goodwill, great place. I don't have time. I used to though, but I do a lot of restorations work, but I reach out to the people who do. And I educate, just like this, as much as I can about, hey, what is this? That's just an old bag, right? That's probably some Boy Scout stuff. It was at the Battle of Iwo Jima. And I actually researched, this was owned by Private J.F. McDonald. Wait, that's not McDonald.
Now, how did you find out that that was his?
The
Markings? You backtracked?
I am an expert in research.
Okay.
I'm going to be giving a talk in May, wherever Jody went. May and November, I'm giving a class here on veterans research, on how to do it through the various repositories that exist. Unfortunately, the National Archives in St. Louis burned to the ground, but there are ways, in the 1970s, there was a horrible fire. They didn't have the correct fire suppression equipment, and it burned to the ground, and every veteran's service record from World War I through Vietnam, completely lost.
Oh my God.
Completely is kind of a, there is some, but there are other ways to do the research, thankfully.
Digitized?
No.
Oh, 70s. No.
70s. Yeah. No, we were still monochrome at that point. Antennas on the televisions. Yeah. So this was actually owned by Staff Sergeant Robert P. Moyer, and he was with the 3rd Marine Division. He went from this stuff. He was in Guadalcanal. He was in Bougainville. He was at the Battle of Iwo Jima. And he was 3rd Battalion, 25th Marine Regiment, 4th Marine Division, Fleet Marine Force. And again, he was an Amtrak crew member. Thrown away. The packs. So, yeah, no. Okay, so yeah, he was 4th Marine Division. I have 3rd Marine Division over here as well. This is also Moyer's stuff. All right, and so I want to point this out. Everybody thinks, so I had a really good friend when I lived in Italy for 3 years, and I had a friend who had a lot of questions about World War II and battles, and it was his impression that before any event, service members are issued their gear, which is not the case. You're issued it at the beginning, and then incrementally, if you need new equipment, it's given to you. But you don't get fresh gear every battle or no, it's impossible. Not when you're feeding, doing 330,000 meals a day. You're not issuing new coats but I wanted to point out, for Moyer, look at his staff sergeant stripes. They're just drawn on, okay? We didn't have time to, let's sew on some patches before this battle, right? Because we have so much else going on. Probably let's play some cards. No, you're cleaning your weapon. You're drawing the gear that you need. You're making sure you have the gear that you need. And oh, by the way, yeah, just draw some stripes on because that's where we're at. This was 80 years ago, and we're still, just drawing them on. Okay, it's not clean. It's not surgical. It was functional. By the end of the Iwo Jima battle, we had, I have the statistics here, 6,100 killed in action, 27,000 wounded. So to put that in perspective, just for the 36 days of battle, 6,100 people is just slightly less than the entire 20-year global war on terrorism, okay? So for the 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq, slightly more killed in action than just on Iwo Jima. Japanese losses were just over 20,000. There were almost no prisoners of war. What was that?
They didn't believe in that.
Correct.
They were about to kill themselves.
Yeah.
Correct. So when it comes to artifacts, I wanted to point out, you'll see a beautiful display out there in the museum hall of dress uniforms. And often people look at dress uniforms as just that. It was used for official, parades, official functions. We don't generally affiliate them with battles, right? It's not true. So this particular uniform was owned by Private J.F. McDonald, and he was with the 3rd Marine Division, and he landed on Iwo Jima on February 27th of 1945. And you'll see that this is his dress uniform. Does everyone know what this is on this side over here? The ruptured duck. What's it for?
Honorable discharge.
Correct. Now, why did...
Also allowed you to wear your clothing during the clothing shortage after the war.
Correct.
After you were honorably discharged.
Correct.
That's why the guys wore out their pants.
Yep. That's why a lot...
Say that again, I couldn't.
So the ruptured duck existed because at the conclusion of World War II, the service members that were coming back didn't have civilian clothes.
Right.
And so this is what they had to wear. They didn't always have money, all right? A lot of it was being sent home to support their families. So the first thing you got home from war and did was paint the house, usually. You'll see this stuff. If you see a World War II jacket covered in paint, it's authentic because that's what they did. They had 3 to 4 years of home stuff that they needed to catch up on, which is why a lot of this doesn't exist because it was used. And the ruptured duck meant that they had been discharged, that they were not held under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and they were also released of any military obligations like saluting or military courtesy. This was just clothing. The period was 45 days, something like that, and they could wear it on the streets, they could wear it unbuttoned, didn't have to wear a cover. But I wanted to point out that Private McDonald, this was taken to Iwo Jima. It was in his duffel bag. Now, it was likely left on the ship when he was put onto the beach to fight. He didn't carry this over onto the battleground, but this was present on one of those 500 ships that were surrounding Iwo Jima, as were all of the dress uniforms. So when you're talking about the 101st, Band of Brothers, you see the HBO miniseries, absolutely fantastic. There's a scene where they're getting into the trucks in Bastogne, and every one of them is throwing their duffel bags in the back. That's all their stuff. This wasn't held at some higher echelon elsewhere. When they moved from ship to ship to battlefield, their things
Or in the bag. Yeah.
were in their 20-year duffel bag. And they just kept putting new markings on them. And this was just hanging in someone's basement, the story untold. But then when you peel apart the layers and you actually identify what all this stuff is, you find out that this was a China Marine that served all the way to the end of World War II. So a couple of the artifacts, and Jody always time check me if I'm just up here yammering. Okay, so a couple of the artifacts that I have that are kind of exciting. Prior to any military engagement, all right, you do what's called preparation of the battlefield. And what that is you saw, I was a prior intelligence officer, and you prepare the most likely course of action. So you're a storyteller. And just like in this particular room, I'm going to tell you that, okay, after this event, you're going to get in your car, you're going to turn it on, you're going to drive down this road. This is going to be the weather, and this is going to most likely what's going to happen to you until you walk through your door, all right? That's how battles are done. And in this particular case, before every battle, the intelligence officers prepare the battle space by drawing up maps. And for Iwo Jima, it was no different than Normandy. It was no different than Sicily, southern France, Guadalcanal. You have 100,000 people that are going to show up on the beach kind of at the same time, incrementally, but even 10,000 is a lot. And of course, they're always going to arrive at the exact right spot with all their stuff, right? So what they did was they created these beach landing maps. And if you can't see this, I encourage you later, please come up and see it. So the landing ship tank drivers and the LCVPs, the smaller landing craft, they're all showing up on the exact same beach. And of course, it's under favorable conditions. The sea is nice and calm. They're welcomed with snacks when they get there. No, it's horrible, all right? Everything's exploding around them. The sea state is miserable. It's the worst case scenario. So they create these maps that have the lanes of the beaches defined. And they're handed to the coxswain, and they say, all right, this is going to be your lane, and each one is labeled, and it shows a very easy silhouette of the island. And you might recognize this thing sticking up out of the end over here. That's Mount Suribachi, right? Made very famous on February 23rd, 1/400th of a second, defined the image of the Marine Corps for the next 1,000 years. But they had to get there first. And so they had these little maps, and they handed them out, and they said, here you go. And when they got their briefings on the back, they wrote their notes. Who are the hospital ships? What was the signaling that they had to do? All right? Because they were using semaphore. They didn't get on their cell phones. They didn't even have radios for the most case. They were using lights and hand signals, all right? And so you'll see that this has been folded up and taped. Is this one classified? It is. Secret up in the corner. It's paper, just regular paper, because that's what they had. Yeah, there wasn't the cool synthetics that we have today. I mean, we went from rubber tires to synthetic in World War II in a matter of a year. We had not developed like water-resistant anything. This was here, brief, good luck, and we're going to do this tomorrow. And we're going to do it every day for the next 36 days.
Don't lose it or tear it.
Right. No. So this, the other one, you'll see. So both of these are original. Okay. So this is the exact opposite view. So that's the northern beach. This is the southern beach. And you'll see that the classification was changed at the bottom to restricted because once we had landed, the Japanese were very much aware of what we had done.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a secret anymore. Right. But that's why I said I wanted to tell the joke at the beginning, because when we start handling and discussing these artifacts, when I'm talking about 100,000 people landing and 6,000 succumbing to their wounds, it gets a little bit serious because this stuff is infused with that day. It's not trivial when you touch the artifacts. And when you walk through the museum, you understand that these are real things. They're presence of the people who built them, the people who got them there, the people who operated with them. It's in that material. I have some other things here that are affiliated with the Iwo Jima. They weren't actually necessarily there. This is a Pacific Campaign Marine Corps helmet cover. Now the Marines had a completely separate contract than the Army. So the reason they call it a uniform is completely wrong. It's actually unique because all of the different branches had their own clothes. And so the Army herringbone twill uniform was different than the pattern 44 Marine Corps herringbone twill uniform. Herringbone twill is the type of fabric, and you can tell that this one was worn very easily by the sun fading on the inside. The Marine Corps was the only ones that wore, the only branch during World War II that wore a helmet cover issued on their helmets. Corpsmen that were assigned to the Marine Corps also wore Marine uniforms. I asked this question a lot of the audience, and I try to talk, so my cousin is in the audience, and I try to make sure that everybody understands terms. Is there everyone in here, does everyone understand why it's called the Marine Corps? Okay, so when we first started out, I probably should have led with this, but when we first started out, we had two branches of the United States military, Army, Navy. That was it. So the way that the Army is structured, underneath the Army, you have armies. For example, General Mark Clark was in charge of the 5th Army in Italy. All right? Underneath an army is a corps, and you have several corps under one army. And underneath a corps, you have a division. All right, so let's back it up to the Marine Corps. They are a corps within the Navy, the Department of the Navy. And underneath the corps in World War II, they had 6 divisions. That's it. The reason that they're called a corps is because they cannot exceed that size. They cannot be 2 Marine Corps. It's just 1. And so that's why the Marines were solely dedicated to the Pacific theater and not the Atlantic. Now, there were Marines present in the Atlantic, but they were used on ship's company, meaning on each Navy ship, there was a detachment of Marines, but it was usually like 10 or 20. And the reason I bring this up is the Marine Corps had its own uniforms designed for them, completely different from the Army, completely different than the Army Air Force. And corpsmen, or medical personnel assigned to the Marines, because the Marines do not have medical personnel, religious personnel, and so they borrow them from the Navy. They wore Marine uniforms while attached. Any questions so far? All right. Uniqueness about Iwo Jima, it means Sulphur Island. And because it was made by volcano, it was unique from all of the other landing sites by the fact, and this is actual sand from Iwo Jima. A friend of mine went there several years ago and brought me back a jug of this. And I like to show it off because it was unique. Part of preparation of the battlefield, we learned at Dunkirk and Dieppe, is everyone familiar with those two battles, were complete failures. And they were failures not because of the effort, they were failures because of lack of preparation of the battlefield. They didn't understand the soil content of the very beach they landed on. Well, if you have a 60,000-pound Sherman tank, for example, all right, they weren't used at Dunkirk and Dieppe, but a 60,000-pound tank and you're landing it on sand, you have to have an understanding of what that soil content is. All right. I think recently you guys were out here with your tanks getting them muddy. Didn't one of them get stuck? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And that's in your backyard. And so that's tough when you have a 60,000-pound fighting machine and you can't get off the sand. All right. Now, thankfully for the United States, we have a place in the United States that has sand just like this.
Yeah,
All right. Where is it?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. And so prior to Iwo Jima, the Marines actually trained on the Big Island because it's exactly the same thing. But it doesn't have the consistency of normal sand. And so you have to understand the sea state, which is the waves coming up. Normandy, Erwin Rommel understood very much sea state by the fact, and I think you had some great briefings earlier today, how to keep an adversary off of the beach. Put obstacles out there. Well, the Japanese didn't think they needed to. I brought up the fact that Iwo Jima was critical for its airfields that had already been built by the Japanese. They had destroyed them too a little bit, but we were able to send in construction personnel, Navy Seabees. Does everyone know why they're called Seabees? Trick question? That's right. Construction Battalion is where they actually got their names from, and the letters CB goes together. Sounds neat. Cool little logo. Let's, ship it. And so, therefore, the island was seized. It was used as an airfield and by the Japanese and by us, but there was no preparation for beach landing obstacles to keep us off. So we had to know what that sea state was going to look like. We'll talk later on about, not today, but about Normandy. It was critical because we had to land at a certain lunar condition because rise and lowering of the tides. Same thing. This is critical for that first day. If you can't land and refortify, this is why the Germans failed during Operation Barbarossa in Russia, because they couldn't keep the supply lines going. And that's why I started off this discussion when we're talking about 110,000 people. If you can't keep fuel and food and ammunition flowing, you're going to fail. Right? And we see that in modern, and I'm not going to touch on it, but we see that in modern battle. It's pivotal. All right? Everybody eats, everybody poops, they all need water, and they all need food. And we haven't even gotten to the warfighter stuff. All right? So you have to understand the very soil that you're talking about. Also up here, okay, and just like here in Gettysburg, you know, our prized battlefield that we've protected, there's always artifacts, okay, everywhere. When you have 150,000 people fighting to the death, there's going to be stuff, all right? And so a friend of mine, a fellow Navy chief, went to Iwo Jima 4 years ago. I think I have the date on here. 2016. And I said, hey, since you're going, can you look? He just looked down. And here's a 50 caliber machine gun casing. And here is a medical bottle that we're just leaching out of the ground because
So nobody overlooks this stuff? You can just pick that stuff up?
it's everywhere. Still. If you, I won't say if, when you go to Europe, when you go to the battlefield, when you go to Gettysburg, okay, and you look around, when you have hundreds of thousands of people fighting, it's everywhere, okay?
Yeah, but you pick it up here, they'll pick you up.
Well, it's different. That's because all battlefields are fought in national parks, right? Yeah. I was coming back around to it. All right, so. So, what's unique about this 50 caliber shell casing?
It's been fired.
Ah,
Exploded.
it is exploded. Okay, so this one has not been fired. This is called a cook-off.
A what?
Cook-off.
Cook-off.
All right.
How does that happen?
Means it got hot.
Means it got higher. So
What?
this came from something on fire.
Okay.
So this was likely in a fire, and so it's not bad enough that you're fighting 36 days, and the enemy's shooting at you. But then you have what's called sympathetic detonation. So you have just things all over the battlefield, and I'll get to this in a minute. But this isn't even being shot at, and this can just get hit and just blow up. All right. So just ordnance sitting around the battlefield is exploding because of fires, because of just action happening. All right. But this was just found laying because there's just so much. All right. The American K-bar issued to all Marines, have been issued to all Marines, still issued. It's usually open. I'm not going to mess with that. All right. To all Marines and corpsmen. And this one was just for fun. I brought this in last time as just a talking piece. What is it?
Landmine.
Yep. And somebody asked me, is that a canteen? I was like, well,
Not really.
you can try to drink out of it once, right? See, someone else gets the dad jokes. So I bring these things to show, and again, there's plenty more in the museum. And I'm going to be wrapping up here shortly for your questions. I want to make sure that I give you the option to pick I do Q&A. But it's small. If this was sitting just even partially exposed out of the ground, you wouldn't even notice it. It's tan painted. This is Japanese anti-personnel mine. And even to today, okay, you can't find all of it. And so it's also very dangerous, the battlefields.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw the explosion that happened in Norfolk last week.
Yep.
Aerial bomb, Norfolk, England.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I read the same thing. I was like, Norfolk? That's right. Here in the colonies, we copied the names. Yeah.
What happened?
Aerial bomb exploded from World War II.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody get hurt?
I didn't read the rest of the article. Yeah. But yeah, ordnance is found all the time.
Well, I'm not surprised about that. It's just like, They just found a shell on Little Round.
I believe it. Yeah. And it's 100 and what? 160. I was like, how many years is it? Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah. And it's still as dangerous. The reason I bring it up is if you find ordnance on the battlefield, don't touch it. It actually gets worse and worse as it decomposes. People think, now this is an exploded shell casing. I bring these things in to give that extra perspective that if you're walking the battlefield and you see something like that, don't mess with it. It is more angry now than the day it was made. In France, there are a lot of very disgusting munitions, blister agents that are chemical weapons that are still 100 years now that are unexploded. And so should you travel, I warn you, don't mess with that stuff. But it's still everywhere. Jody, where are we on time? It's 4:30. 4:30, okay. Yeah, so I'm good. Oh, we didn't get to it. Okay, so this is a Japanese 81 millimeter mortar round, and it is identical to the United States 81 millimeter mortar round. This style was designed by France, and it was known as the Brant mortar. And it was made by almost every country in World War II. So the United States used it, Italy, Japan, Germany made an 8 centimeter version, Russia made an 82 millimeter version. Now, they were all completely interchangeable. So you could actually fire someone else's mortar round out of your mortar. The Russians said, we'll make ours 82 so we can use everyone else's, but they can't use ours.
Oh,
Yeah. I brought this in as just an example of Japanese ordnance that was being used. It's unique. The color codes are different depending upon which country. So in the United States, this would have been green with yellow markings for high explosive. The Japanese put a single yellow band for theirs, and of course the kanji on the side. But that's why this was brought in, just to show a Japanese thing. All right, so I open up the floor to any questions. Please bombard me. It doesn't have to be about Iwo Jima. It can be about anything Pacific Campaign, just as long as it's the World War II American experience.
Okay. How the hell did they get those planes for Doolittle's raid onto the aircraft carrier?
Crane. Yeah, they craned them up there.
But they were so big and they were so close together.
Big cranes.
Big, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That cuts it
But no,
down.
it's a great question. And so if you think about, so I love talking about World War II because
I
it
don't know
was,
how the hell they got them to fly.
it
off
was,
the thing.
well, so it, okay, well I can talk about that. But
Yeah.
16 million people served in World War II. That's just service members. Okay, when you walk around the museum and you look at rationing and recycling and all the innovation, we went from the Wright Flyer to pressurized aircraft in 30 years. Like, whoa! And at the height in 1945, and this is coming out in my third book that's actually going to be out this summer. It's about the B-29 superfortresses. At the height of production, they were building 4 B-29s a day. Okay? And so I have Questmasters Museum has a Facebook fan page. I just posted a video. It's coming up in a couple weeks. It's fantastic color footage of B-17 production. And you're watching, it's done in components. And you're watching them put together these aircraft. And meanwhile, you know, I can relate to the Bucks. It'll take 5-10 years to restore one Sherman tank, and they're cranking them out by the minute. And it's like,
Yeah.
can my grandmother give me a hand with some of this stuff? Because it's, I mean, seriously. So for the Doolittle raid, they actually practiced in Biloxi, Mississippi. A Keesler Air Force Base was one of the training bases. And just like in the movie Pearl Harbor, which they then talk about the Doolittle raid, but well, whatever, it's Hollywood. So they did. They stripped the aircraft down to barely nothing, taught them to fly very, very short, because that's the size of the aircraft that the USS Hornet they flew off of. And then they stacked them as deep as they could, the B-25s at the tail end, the aft of the carrier,
Yeah.
and they took them off, yeah. And then, unfortunately, they were spotted hundreds of miles earlier than their original launch location. The men and women in World War II, they were made of pure steel.
My dad was a nose gunner on a B-24.
Yeah.
He was at Ploesti,
Oh, very, God.
among other places.
Yeah, so Pulaski, I mean, that was a battle. I mean, they're flying, you know, right above the treetops to bomb the Romanian oil refineries.
Yeah.
Lucky to have survived.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. All right,
I'm
so
very
yes.
glad he did.
And bombard me. So next question, please.
So since all battles are fought in national parks,
Please, reuse that joke.
I've never been to Japan. What's Iwo Jima like in terms of, you know, can you go there? Can you pick up artifacts? Is it designated?
That's a great question. So the island is military controlled by the Japanese. You can get there. It's usually through the United States military. It's not a resort. They don't have any facilities for vacation. It's all for military use. I guess it would be a comparison to our Midway Island, which still is controlled by. Although I think there is some civilians that live on Midway now, but it is a military-controlled island.
Lots of birds, lots of seabirds.
Yes. Yeah. So it is a very flat, except for Mount Suribachi, military-controlled island because of where it's located. I mean, it's 750 miles from Japan, so it's used for Japanese maritime self-defense.
So they don't monitor you when you pull the shell back, came back home?
No.
I thought that was
No.
all for military.
No. Nope. Because those things. I mean, that's trash. Now, if it was a live round, yeah, of course, that would bring some concern. But that's, you know, it doesn't have a primer. It's been cooked off. It's been disfigured. It's no longer able to be fired.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Next question. And so the other piece that I want to bring up is it's not just stuff that you find on the battlefield. It's also people. So and that's why when I say I start with a joke, because we get kind of somber when we talk about artifacts, in that not just helmets and guns and things are being leaching from the ground. It's also bits of people because it's violent, and so to find remains very common. Yes, sir.
There's a lot of stuff out there now that's being sold on the internet. That's
Very much.
Obviously fake.
Yeah, oh yeah, oh sure.
How long did it take you to determine or to educate yourself enough to sort the fakes out from the real?
Sure. So I've been doing this for 40 years, World War II history, writing, research, and some of the education is costly. As we know, artifacts are done so that people can make money. Provenance is very important for determining their history. And so to look at a piece, all right, this stuff was thrown away. You can tell that, just like I said earlier, you know, when I came back, my 8th deployment in 2010 to Afghanistan, all of my stuff went in a box. It's been 13 years, haven't looked at any of it. Why? Why would I? It's just my stuff, right? It's the same thing with all of these artifacts. And so this was not kept. The buttons have rusted away from the trunk that it was probably under a porch or basement, you know, where you keep your prized war uniforms. Right, because you came home and you had to paint the house and tend to whatever. It wasn't about, this was just utility, you know, it wasn't about preservation. And in recent years, we've realized that artifact preservation is important. And so like myself, like many in this room, we have a bunch of veterans I see hats on, and thank you for your service, that I was smart enough to put my stuff in a box, all right, label it, it's in plastic bags. But I don't bring it out and I, you know, like have wonderful memories. No, it's just there for when somebody cares. And so when it comes to artifact identification, you kind of have to do the sniff test, all right? What makes this real, all right? You can look at the paint, the wear, the literal smell, and sometimes, so in the Q&A veterans discussion that I'm going to have veterans research in May, all right, when looking at an artifact, all right, so this was worn by a human being, correct? Check the pockets.
Oh, good point.
All right?
Yeah.
Everyone in here has stuff in their pockets, I'm sure. Look at the bottoms, all right? So I was educated by a Civil War historian many, many years ago. And there are telltale things you can tell about people. Look at the bottom of the sleeve, all right? Which one has more wear? You can tell if they're left-handed or right-handed, okay? This was probably worn, what's that?
There were no lefties in the military. Excuse me? Excuse me?
Uh-oh, fight. Moving right along. So as human beings, we put things in our pockets. And it's one of the most fun things I love to do is look at the bottom. Most of the time, you'll find tobacco. Okay, you'll find flower petals, all right? Tissues, things like that. Train stubs. Because when they came home, and home they came, that's what they carried their stuff in, all right, when they went on their first date, parade, whatever, okay? So for artifact identification, I always say, look at what the thing is. Most of the time, you'll have property markings, okay? That's his name stamped above his pocket. Not so people knew who he was, because everyone's just trying to get their own stuff back. I did, it was a very somber research on a Army service member that was killed, and I'll be talking about that in the November discussion, an Army service member that was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. And when anyone is killed in the military, they do what's called an individual deceased personnel file. They're kept in Fort Knox, Tennessee, Kentucky. I've been talking for like 2 hours now, so it all kinds of blends. But all these IDPFs are capturing of that person. So when a person is killed in combat, they have to be interred. But in order to do that, they have to identify the body. And by doing that, they look at every piece of thing that they have with them. And this one service member that I was doing research on, the graves registration was looking at the clothing. And because this is how you would likely, one of the means of identification. Okay, I did one on one gentleman who had been beheaded and he did not have dog tags. So you have to look at the item. But this one service member, his jacket, his t-shirt, his socks, his pants, his underwear, none of the individual markings matched, and none of them were to him.
Oh.
Okay? And why do you think that is?
Lost all his stuff. Replaced
Stole. Trying to get his stuff back.
When you wash your clothes, you don't do it by yourself. Okay? You're in the field. If you have the opportunity, everybody washes their stuff together. And then when it's dry, maybe if you have time to do any of that, you get socks back. You don't get your socks back. And so this is Bastogne. They had already been fighting for months. The likelihood, he probably just took those garments off of someone else that had better stuff than him. And when he was killed, none of it could be used to identify him. And it's horrible. But it gives us an insight of what the battlefield actually looks like. You know, it's not at the end of the day, oh, I need one new jacket, helmet cover, you know, chewing gum. No.
Did they ever figure out who he was?
Yeah, absolutely.
How?
I can't remember. I have to reread the report. But it was dismissed. All of the clothing was not a factor for identification. Yep.
I had a vet who actually ended up in Korea. It was in the very beginnings of Vietnam. A lot of vets, and actually it's a very common practice nowadays, guys will carry extra sets of dog tags in the soles of their boots. Like actually, I knew one guy, he did 2 tours in Iraq, he had them stitched into his pants pocket.
Yep.
Just on the off chance, because the Japanese and the North Koreans were known for using high explosive shrapnel shells. And sometimes all they find is a half a boot.
Yep, exactly. And that's why this is one of my favorite pieces by the fact that it's from the 1920s. And people don't realize that World War II didn't start and everybody got issued new stuff.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If you had been in for a decade or two, World War I veterans were serving in World War II. So the chance of having something that was 20 or 30 years prior being worn is pretty good. Depression era people were not about throwing it away. Yes, sir.
I would assume that those things have hard markings on it, helmets, knives, guns, whatever. There are there's been enough research done on it, there's books, there's something that you can go to find out if that is an original piece, when it was manufactured, where it was used.
There are, especially, so when you're talking about like this K-bar, you have individual markings on the back of who owned it, but you can tell by this manufacturer that this is in fact authentic. The stuff that's being made today, and there are a few groups that make fabulous reproductions for the reenactment community and the movie industry. You have to. Saving Private Ryan, if you've seen that movie, that beach scene was made predominantly with original gear. 100%, yes. Yes. And so with stuff being used, I bought a bunch of it back. I bought a bunch of it when the movie had concluded. But the point is that it's a necessity to have the reproductions made. Do that sniff test. Look at what the thing really is. Look at how it's constructed. Thread, stitching, the patterns. A lot of the companies, I'll give a shout out to At the Front. They make some of the best reproductions they make for the movie industry and reenactors. They make it just close enough so that you can tell the pattern will be off. He gets it nearly identical, but so that it can't happen, all right? Because this is preservation history. We are the voice of these artifacts. And that's why I started out that way, is they can't tell the story by themselves. And so to make it pretty accurate, I agree with that because it's needed. I don't want the originals running around out in the field for reenactments. I want reproductions being used. Yes?
My dad was with the 12th Marine Division. 12th, not division, 12th, yes.
12th Private Regiment.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He was with Headquarters Company.
Okay.
Would they have been there landing?
Yes.
They would have been there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the entire complement would have, of a division would have landed. Even so, if you look at, and there's a fantastic book, I highly recommend this book. It's by Eric Hamill. It's probably the best Iwo Jima book that exists. It is picture heavy. I don't know if, I'm sure you can get copies of it on Amazon. Absolutely fantastic. And he goes over every aspect from the initial landing through the flag raising on the 23rd all the way up to the end. And so when those LSTs, those landing ship tanks landed at the beach, and the front opened up, depending upon what type of vessel it was, everybody was there. The sailors, the Marines.
So headquarters company would have been there too?
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
That's- I always wondered. if
Yes,
they were actually
yeah.
there.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, you know, the service members didn't talk about their experience because it was horrible. And so we piece it back together as best as we can as historians and family members. And yes, please ask those questions because you ask it enough. There, and again, in the discussion I have in May, I'm going to teach how to look through the various archives that do still exist to try to put those questions back together, or those answers. So.
I have a neat picture of him at what looks like a campaign desk
Oh,
with my mom's picture on that.
that's adorable. Yeah.
Yeah, I really.
So especially, and I like to, everybody knows who George Bush is? The World War II TBM
Yeah.
Avenger pilot?
Yeah.
Do you know what his airplane's name was?
Barbara.
Barbara, right? So it's adorable when we look at World War II and it seems like so much going on, and then we get back to that simple detail. You know, that's my grandmother.
Yeah.
Or that's not my grandmother. Good, laugh, it's supposed to be fun. Okay, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up here. Any other questions before we conclude today's discussion? All right, so you guys had a very full day. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks to the World War II American Experience Museum. And please have a safe ride home.